All right, welcome. Thank you for coming to the 2013 Advanced Hazardous Waste Inspector Training. My name is Leon Worsham. I'm with San Diego County Environmental Health Department. I'm on the Hazardous Waste Technical Advisory Group, as are some of my other speakers today. Nick Crane from Riverside County. John Missa is also with San Diego County. Every year we do this conference, and the Hazardous Waste Technical Advisory Group is now responsible for the content of the class. This year it's in Southern California, so we've taken it on. Next year it'll be in Northern California. If you want to get involved with that, then go ahead and talk to your technical advisory group and see if you want to get involved for the training for next year's conference. A couple of things today. We are also known as the WGC, the Waste Geek Club. That's us. Your evaluations are important. A lot of the conference training that we have put together are based on the evaluations that the attendees have put requests in. We are covering air emissions this time because that was asked for. Waste counting is coming soon. Closure costs is a class now. So we modify the conference in accordance with your requests. All right. So some of my coworkers went to a class. I wasn't able to make it. It was a train the trainer on effective presentations, and this is the what's in it for me slide. So money, really. Respect, probably not, but you can make some friends that are part of the WGC. And really what motivates me to do this is my dad runs a small business. I came from small business, and I like being able to help the businesses understand what we do, why they're doing it, and help get them to compliance without making them spend unnecessary money. So learning these laws and regulations will benefit them. Our objectives today will be learning how to identify point of generation of a hazardous waste, and then when it's subject to regulation. So that's what I'm going to take you through for the next hour, hour and a half. And then after we cover all our point of generation issues, Nick Crane's going to discuss RCRA Listed waste, and that'll transition into John Missa covering the air emission standards under Title 22. So in addition to that, I'm going to show you how to use various state and federal guidance documents on some of these advanced topics and provide some resources for getting answers. I do not have all the answers, but I hope that by the end of today you'll have those resources you need to find the answers you need for the complex questions that you have. Point of generation. The point where a material becomes a waste is important because it's also the point where the waste determination is made and samples are taken. It's the point where your waste is counted towards your generator status as a small quantity, large quantity generator. It's where your tank and container standards apply, the treatment tier determination is made, or the land disposal restrictions apply to you. So, if you walked into a business and he showed you this process tank goes into a waste settling tank, the non-hazardous wastewater goes over to the sewer, the initial sludge waste goes to the heated drying tank. What is the first thing that this person has to do? This business owner might only have to do one thing. What is it? And it's a hazardous waste determination, correct? So, in doing your hazardous waste determination, there's two ways to do it: sample analysis or knowledge of process. Knowledge of process is nice because it costs less, but it's not always appropriate. When you do your hazardous waste determination, back to the basics. Is it a waste? Is it a hazardous waste? Or is it excluded? Is it not a waste because it's exempted under certain sections of our regulations, or is it excluded recycled material and not a waste under the law? After you determine it's a waste, determine if it's a hazardous waste via listings, which Nick will cover, or via characteristics. So, this is a flow chart. The EPA put this together. Solid waste flow chart help you figure out if your process generates something that would be considered a waste. Is your material now a waste? I asked earlier, and not anyone in the class has used this recently, but please give it a try. It's very helpful for RCRA waste determinations, but remember, in California, all those things that are recycled, reclaimed, we still characterize or classify as a waste. So you're going to have additional waste here in California. So sometimes it's not so simple. who's supposed to make the waste determination? And the answer that I showed you is the generator. So the person who process produces the waste or first cause it to become subject to regulation. The generator must do the waste determination. As the inspector, it's not our job to do the business's waste determination. We want to help them, and we will because they don't understand it, but it is their responsibility, so they need to do it. We'll only call them on it if they don't do it properly. So, two ways they can do it: testing or knowledge of process, which is applying knowledge of the hazard characteristic of the waste in light of the materials or processes used. It's also called waste analysis. Here's a link to a great document. I'll show you the document next, but this excerpt came directly from the EPA document, and it says the cornerstone of a hazardous waste program is the ability of facility personnel to properly identify and characterize through waste analysis all the waste they generate or dispose of. So it is the key. As we go on the businesses and inspect them, we need to know when it's a waste and when it's a hazardous waste before we know any set of requirements they apply with. So that's the major problem I see when we do our inspections. At the end, they just haven't, a lot of times, properly identified their waste and when they're hazardous. Here's a link to that document I described, the excerpts from here. All these slides you'll see have hyperlinks to the resources we use, except for the RCRA lines, which I'll show you later. Sample analysis. If you need to do sampling, there are very specific requirements, test methods, and equipment needed to do it. Here is a great resource, SW846 testing. Use this for any analysis that you do. So, hitting the basics real fast before we hit our scenarios. For point of generation, a hazardous waste is either declared a waste, it's characteristic, it's listed, or it's a mixture or residue that came from a hazardous waste. So I have a picture from a business of mine. This is a compressed gas supplier, and I thought this was pretty clear. They declared this waste that says hold for disposal as hazardous waste. If someone wanted to use knowledge of process, they could, and it's sometimes acceptable. It's easy to use when it's a listed waste. It's because listing is only a function of how the waste is generated. So you know that it's hazardous when it's listing. There are a few of those wastes that could later on be unlisted or tested out of the listing if they're no longer ignitable, corrosive, or reactive, but that's a small percentage of the listings. So listing's an easy place to use knowledge of process. Some other places where it might be appropriate is when it's too dangerous to sample, because there's health and safety issues, the physical nature of the waste, like construction debris. If you have lead on your paint on your construction debris, you might just want to manage it all as debris, or when you have discarded unused chemicals, P&U listing. So if you're going to use process knowledge, that document I showed you, waste analysis at facilities that generate, treat, and store, process knowledge should include a detailed information on how you came to your determination. It might be using similar data for these types of waste generated by processes that are similar. It might be other types of information for the chemicals you use. There are a lot of ways to do this, but it should include something written, because in enforcement actions, the EPA has said that they look for documentation that clearly demonstrates the information relied upon is sufficient to identify the waste accurately and completely. So the fundamental questions we're going to go through today are: is it a solid waste? Is it a hazardous waste? And if so, you'll learn that you have a point of generation. And then when is it subject to regulation? So does everyone remember the waste chart here? This is the secondary materials. If they're spent materials, sludges, byproducts, or commercial products, and they're treated or sent for disposal through these ways, then they are a waste. Under RCRA, when you see 1 asterisk, you'll know that 1 asterisk, it's a RCRA waste. California is different in these areas here. Sludges that are characteristic, byproducts that are characteristics, and commercial chemical products that are reclaimed are not waste under RCRA, but they are in California. California also captures speculatively accumulated commercial products as a waste. So where's the point of generation? Here we go. Point of generation considerations. This is today's focus. Where is the POG, and then when is it subject to regulation? And I want to point out that your point of generation can be different for waste coding versus waste counting, for your land disposal restrictions, treatment permitting, or spills and remediation. Today, we're just going to identify what the point of generation is. There it is, point where it's first generated. And this sounds so simple, but it's not. When the generator first determines that it's no longer useful, or they decide to discard the material. So would it be true for me to say, I'm a generator, right? I'm a business person, and I've got a process, and I use some chemical, say it's a plating tank, and I want to put it over in another container, and the inspector comes out and they say, oh, well, I think that's a waste. I say, no, I didn't determine that that's a waste. I think I might use it again. Is that a good position for me to have as a business? Can I defend that? It might be difficult, because some of what a waste is just by definition. If it's been used in a process, it can be a waste. So in California, we have excluded recyclable materials that captures a lot of those things that can be reused later. And there's specific law written for used plating materials, stripper etchants. So it makes it more complex. It's not so simple. All right. Again, this is out of our 22 CCR. It's the same as the air regulations. The point where a solid waste produced by a system is determined to be hazardous, defined in this division. All right, so now what we're going to do, I'm just going to show you some pictures. I'm stealing this information, and I think I give credit at the end to the resources I use to come up with your Q&A are mostly RCRA onlines. And a lot of those I got out of chapter 14 of my Bible here, my McCoy's RCRA Unraveled. So you'll see at the end the information on McCoy's. But first we're going to look at the picture. I'm going to give you a question, and then we're going to try and think our way through it, and then we'll show you the answer that the EPA came up with. All right. Does anyone know the answer to this and want to shout it out on camera right now? No? All right. So much for thinking our way through it. All right. So that is directly out of this database. Does everyone have a phone with internet, a computer, a laptop, anything right now? Last year I was able to have 2 computer screens, and I was able to work through this. But if you want, real quick, I'd like you guys all to just try and do this for me. If you have a smart device, go ahead and get an internet connection in here if you can. And we're going to go look up RCRA online, and we're going to go to the website, and hopefully you see that page. Google. I'll give you guys a minute here. Excuse me. Good, everyone? Okay. So on this page, you'll see there are several ways to search. Topics, full text, advanced. Topic search is great if you want a lot of information on one topic. You can look up air emission standards, you can look up tank issues, and they'll have a whole bunch of info. Full text search. So just to show you how I came up with my answer, on full text search, everyone just hit full text search, and they should come up with something that looks, let's see if I got it here. No. All right. Full text search, you should get a little box. It'll say search the RCRA online database for the following word or words. And just type in paint removal. And I'm hoping that you get the same selections that I got when I did it here. On mine, about the third one down says RCRA applicability to paint removal waste. Does anyone see that? Okay, good. So we're all working here. So that's this document. You can click on that link there. It'll show you a PDF. You can pull up that document and you will get the EPA information that was provided through a memo, a fax, some type of written publication that the EPA put out. So within this document, the waste determination would be made once the paint has been removed from the surface of the structure. So that's where I found my answer for that situation, which kind of makes sense, because it'd be kind of hard to determine the waste if it's hazardous before that. So while your paint is on the wood, it's not a waste. Once you take it off, now you do your waste determination. That's your point of generation. All right, so as you go through RCRA Online, if you use that for your source, just remember a couple things. If it gives a 40 CFR citation, it's different in this way. 40 CFR will be 260, 261. Title 22 is 66261. For the most part, we mirror the 40 CFR, but we're missing certain sections like that, which I'm trying to get put back. If it reads exactly the same as Title 22, then it's probably good guidance. You can check DTSC and try and find information, but you might not find anything. So, good documents. Yeah, please check DTSC website. It's probably not the best decision to base your entire perspective on only the federal guidance, because California, as you know, is way more stringent. And I'm sorry, I didn't tell you guys, if you got a question or need to slow me down, just throw your hand up, holler, whatever. If you have a question that you think the group would benefit from, please ask. This is the link to the DTSC hazardous waste and recycling letters. I look at this a lot when I deal with my sites that have different types of treatment and recycling, because there's a lot of good guidance on here. Same thing's true, it's got search criteria, put your words in there, hit enter. It's only searching a database of like 861 documents though. And I'm certain that RCRA Online has more than that. All right, so first we're gonna go through some process equipment, and I think we'll take a 5-minute break. And then we're gonna go through point of generation issues for tanks and containers. All right, so here's some of the process equipment that, some of the things we've talked about through time with the technical advisory group and in the office. All right, so here you go. Auto Service Center draining antifreeze from radiators. They commingle it all prior to shipment for recycling. So they're saying they've done some testing and they figure that it's hazardous for lead 40% of the time. The commingled antifreeze is now non-hazardous. Recycling facility distills it, sends the still bottoms that are hazardous to lead for an incinerator. How are the POG issues resolved in this scenario? Well, let's just for a moment not think about everything downstream, but just look at this like, is it a waste when it comes out? So here's the situations that we kind of see in the field. I've had businesses say, no, I take it out, I put it right back in. I say, I'm not bringing my car to you. But I think they really are. I don't think they're making it up. Unless I'm just going down the toilet, but hopefully not. So if it's recycled back into a vehicle under a claim of ERM, which the direct reuse here, right back into the car, or even with some filtering, viscosity adjustment, other things allowed, is that going to be a waste? Correct. It will not be a waste if they meet those conditions of the law. So there are containment, labeling, even record keeping and reporting issues that are required there. Otherwise, all bets are off. So if it's drained into a pan for off-site treatment and disposal, I'm going to call it a spent material that's going for reclamation. Is it a waste now? I'm going to say yes, it's a waste. And is it hazardous? It may or may not be. Yes?
Okay, so for scenario number 1.
Okay.
We're expecting him to say, I took 5 gallons out of this car, and there's supposed to be a piece of paper, I put that 5 gallon right back in that same car.
It probably wouldn't be 5 gallons.
We're expecting to see that at the auto shop. Is that what you're saying?
If they're going to do a radiator repair, it's possible that they took that out and put it back in your.
But they should actually have some kind of written thing saying that. And
So.
to reuse, because I don't see that. They just do the same thing. I just put it right back in.
Yeah, I've never seen anything written. And a lot of what we do is just asking the business questions to verify. I don't think there's anyone that are going to be over the 100 kilogram limit that's in the law for doing the reporting requirement, but anything that could be considered a waste that a business is claiming to be a material, they have to be able to provide something to demonstrate that it is recycled. Written records are great, you can't dispute that. But if they've got policies and procedures in place, and you ask all the employees, and that's what they do, I think they're probably in good shape. So anything that could be a waste, they say they recycle, you have the authority to ask for that under 66261.2, somewhere at the very end of that section, that says they need to provide you that information. Good, John? Right? John will smack me around if I'm wrong. All right, so EPA determined the POG for the antifreeze as each individual radiator. However, for policy and practicality, they let them only say, look, since it's only 40% of the time hazardous, we'll only count 40% of that towards your total for your generator standards, generator status. So again, the point I'm just trying to make here is that it's at that radiator. You had a material used in a process, it's now taken out of that process, and it's a waste. So you have a waste and it's hazardous, and that's the point of generation. All right, let's try another example here. Spray painting operations. I see this all the time. I see a variety of ways of doing this. They do their painting, now they need to clean out the gun, and if you don't do it right, it will destroy your gun. If they say they don't do this, they're lying or just dumb. Because when I haven't cleaned out my painting equipment, it dies and it's expensive. So they use a solvent. Look at the terms here. Terms are key in what we do. So when you see the term spent, that means it meets the definition of spent material as far as I know. So what is the POG? All right, now I think we'll think through it again. All right, painting operations. If it's spent and it's sent for recycling, where does it fall on that chart? Is it a waste or not? In California, waste? All right. So, however, if somehow they're able to take that spent solvent and meet one of our recyclable materials exemptions and put it back into a process and use it for thinning out their next batch of paint, could it be not a waste? I think it could. I know we have a lot of regulation that almost seems to discourage recycling, but the reason it's not to discourage recycling, it's to encourage proper management of the waste and enforce some standards of management in between when it's not very usable and when it's taken out of a process and when it's used again. However, under C, if they have to reclaim it by solvent distillation, then it is a waste. So when you look at Health and Safety Code 25143.2 and you read C, it's giving you an exemption from the treatment permitting requirements. However, you have to manage that material waste, spent material, the waste, in accordance with all the applicable requirements of Title 22. So if it's B or D, on-site reuse without full reclamation, I mean, a lot of our businesses, they have a special green and white sticker. Maybe you've seen them. It just says excluded recyclable material. This stuff, when it's taken out of the gun and before it's used, we see it as hazardous waste until it's distilled and then it's a material. All right, hazardous, yes, usually a listing for ignitability or characteristic for ignitability, toxicity. So here's what EPA said. And if you want, and I'm boring you, or you want to do something else, play around on your smartphone, try and look up some of these RCRA lines, and if something's wrong, raise your hand and call BS on me. I'm fine with that. I'd rather have it right. All right, so here it is. It's the emergence from the spray gun. It's a solid waste. Hazardous waste determination must be made at that point. Now, a solvent still is going to be, you got to look at this differently than your paint gun. This is a unit that gets a waste put into it. So it's processing waste. So spent solvents that are reclaimed distillation for reuse produces still bottoms. What's the POG for the still bottoms? And didn't make you think through that one. Oh well. We'll get to break quicker now. The recycling unit's exempt from regulation. However, the still bottoms are a newly generated waste, so you have a new point of generation. So it's establishing a principle that the residues produced from these exempt treatment units, they're going to be subject to regulation, and there's a new point of generation for that waste. Does that make sense to everyone? See a head bob, and thank you. Appreciate the head bobs, lets me know you're not asleep. Baghouses have been a big issue lately for the tag. We've tried to fix some laws so that businesses aren't over-regulated for capturing some of their baghouse waste, and I don't think we did it well enough, so we'll give it another crack at it this year. But looking at baghouses, this is one of my shipyards. They do a lot of blasting, a lot. Settles out through a unit into one of these little super sacks, they call them here. Then they got to decide what to do with it. So here we go. Emission control system connected to an arc furnace captures dust in a baghouse. But before it gets to that baghouse, after the baghouse, it's piped to the silo where it's loaded into the rail cars or trucks. So is the point of generation where it leaves the furnace, removed from the baghouse, or removed from the silo? Who thinks A? Oh, come on, after all that training I gave you?
I'm trying to understand the scenario.
Okay. Tell me to slow down. Slow down. We got this emission control process. A dust that we're going to presume is hazardous right now is coming out. It's probably going through a little bit of piping to a baghouse. From there, it somehow gets sucked, pulled, or pushed over to a larger collection vessel that can then empty it into a big truck or rail car for off-site management. So I would have thought when it leaves the furnace, after all the training and research I've done, but we'll surprise you here in a minute, I think. So again, is it a solid waste, solid, liquid, or contained gaseous material? And I'm going to go on a limb and say that the particulates are a solid waste. If it's reused under B or D, and we have this a lot, copper slag or other blast media gets through the blasting process, gets separated out, goes to an interim facility where they filter out any trash and unusable debris, and then it goes up to Cal Portland cement and gets made into the concrete. And it actually meets the conditions of excluded recyclable material. However, if it's spent and will be sent for disposal, is it a waste? Yes. And there's a lot of metals that it fails for. I've never seen it fail for organic. All right. Well, here's what the EPA said on this. Normally where it's removed from the baghouse, piping from the baghouse to the silo, we're all part of the dust handling system. So the POG is where the dust leaves the silo. So they're looking at this as all one system, and when it comes out, that's when it's a waste. So DTSC didn't necessarily agree. There were some facilities inspected in the Southern California area that were cited for failing to have a treatment permit or meet tank management standards for their baghouse collection equipment. We looked at the issue and said, wait a minute, let's take a step back here. We don't want to discourage people from capturing these particulates that the air district isn't regulating. So we passed 1620, and that just addressed the issue of calling it basically a solid waste until later in the process. But it didn't address the treatment or the separation of air from the particulates as treatment, and it didn't address the tank standards issues. Yes?
So the ISO, you know where you have the super sack where collects the dust, would that be subjected to container labeling requirements, closed containers?
So the super sack with the dust, does it require labeling requirements?
Yeah.
Yes, that's our position, and based on DTSC's enforcement actions, we've determined that the equipment there should have the labeling and management standards in place.
And how do you do container closure on something?
How do you do container closure on a sack? There is a 20-page EPA document on container closure that came out at the end of 11, I think. Nick brought a copy with him because he's part of the WGC. And it's got a lot of good documents, but the purpose of the container standards for keeping it closed is to prevent emissions and releases. So when you have solid waste, that rather than liquid or volatile organics, they're much more flexible. And I think just having a good seal around where the baghouse piping comes out has been sufficient for my situation. But you have to look at the process. Thank you. When I have questions, can you turn the mic on, and I'll carry the mic out so everyone can hear. All right. So we're working on this issue still. Let's see, I've got a few more.
Thank you. To add to his question and looking at that example there, will a point of generation for as accumulation time be when the bag comes off of that system, or when the bag, will it be accumulated while it's still sitting there? So if they have that bag there for, say, greater than 90 days, it takes X amount of time to fill it up, how does that apply to your accumulation time?
That's a very good question. And we are still, I guess, working on the issue here, but based on DTSC enforcement and inspections, being that they've determined it's a waste before it ever even gets here, we're making sure our facilities have the container labeling and management standards in place upon collection from that vessel. Now, there could be a way around it if it's hard connected piping and we're able to be determined all part of processing equipment, then you may have a way out of that, but I would say for sure if you're containing, labeling, managing that within your 90, 180 days, you'll be okay. So we're still working on the issue. Let's see what other slides I have here. My point is that somewhere within that whole tank system, you have a spent material. But there is this section of law, and gotta love California where they stick these sections of law that said you're not required to have a facility's permit for separation of the air pollutants. So not required if you're removing air pollutants from exhaust gases prior to emission as permitted by the APCD. Not all of these processes are actually required to have a permit with their air district. So if they are, though, then they're not subject to the treatment permitting. However, they're still subject to the other waste generator standards generated from the removal. All right. I think we're doing okay here. So if you have other specific questions at the break, come see me. Tank cleaning and rinsing. This is one of my Is this one of my ships? I may have pulled this offline, but they're cleaning out a big tank on a ship here, I believe. This is one of my facilities. They make they take recyclable materials and they put them in this tank that's stationary for the last 10 years, and they mix it up into their product and they dispense from that. You've got other types of tanks that stand horizontally and vertically, mixing tanks. So tank cleaning and rinsing. All right. So you have residues, excess materials that will be discarded plus the rinsate. Is it a waste? Yes, I guess in some cases, my businesses claim that we've been able to take our rinsate and insert that back into the manufacturing process because we use a like material for our cleaning, and I think they made a good case for that. So it's possible excluded recyclable material provision could apply, but usually, yes, it's still a waste and subject to some standard. Empty container, I don't think that's really going to apply to any of these, but maybe. I guess it's possible to have a process with a good conical tank that gets very empty as part of the process. So listing, characteristic, all right. What I find here on this. Process equipment that is clean and rinse has a point of generation at the end of the process. So listed solvents equals a listed waste. Under the federal scheme, if it no longer exhibits a characteristic at the end of the process, then you do your waste determination at that point of generation, then it might not be subject to regulation anymore, the characteristic. However, just so people don't get confused, in California, you can't intentionally dilute or rinse or wash your residues away. We have a tiered permit scheme set up for removing residues from empty containers. We can do up to 110 gallons. Anything bigger than that, the state oversees under a standardized permit. So don't think that you can just wash it and rinse it until it's no longer characteristic and fall out of regulation. And I think that we capture this in our definition here for, what is the definition I'm thinking of? It basically says it's not subject to treatment permitting requirements if you manage it in accordance with the most stringent standard of each of the individual waste. So you can mix all these different things together, rinse them all together, but you still got to apply your knowledge of process and the materials for the different processes. Otherwise, it's considered treatment. So that's for consolidation. I think that's for consolidated accumulation. All right. So we have a section of law for this too, just like the air emissions that we just talked about from baghouses. So it says for residues removed from equipment for the purpose of cleaning the equipment for continued use is subject to regulation after the residues have been removed. So it constitutes generation and not treatment of hazardous waste. It only applies to equipment not being used to manage hazardous waste. So this is process equipment that's part of it, like a manufacturing or a use equipment, not for equipment that's sole purpose is to manage hazardous waste. Are not subject to regulation. All right, so if the residue was never hazardous, it's not regulated. And we're almost to a break here. Container rinsing, just want to throw this out there. This is way different than tanks. Like I said, we have a section that captures this for tier permitting. But the residue, are they regulated if they exhibit a characteristic or listed? And even under the federal scheme, even if you have an empty container under the federal scheme, then you take the residue out, you still have to properly manage the residue. So when it's removed from the empty container, it's subject to full regulation, and I just put this here because that would be the POG. So federal scheme says this container's empty because it's below a certain percentage weight. California, again, is tougher because there's no continuous stream can come out, or triple rinsed if it's acutely or extremely hazardous. So little different for containers than it is for tanks. All right, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break and come back with a few more examples